Welcome, everyone, to the third edition of the Whole Story Big Picture series. I am John Roach, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Whole Story. We're a tech platform that provides insight into life experience to power better hiring. And we started convening the Big Picture series 3 or 4 months ago. This is the third instance, as I mentioned. And what we're really trying to do with this discussion series is to help stakeholders in the workforce development ecosystem. So whether those are in higher education, formal workforce development programs, employers, policy analysts, philanthropists, fundraisers, to try to take a step back from the day-to-day busyness of all of our lives in those various sectors that interconnect, but to kind of take a step back and look at the big picture, the systemic issues, challenges, opportunities that face us in this, transformational time that we're in the midst of, that has been brought about by, a pandemic, revitalized discussion around racial equity, climate change, the political instability, all of these macro level forces that have converged in this last year that are impacting everything in our society and culture, but particularly focusing in on the ways that these forces are shaping and creating opportunities for us in workforce development and in labor market opportunities for transformation. So I'm really excited about today's panel for 2 reasons. First, because the topic that we're here to discuss is one that's actually really close to my heart in the work that we've been doing over the last few months, and I'll tell you a bit more about that. But also because of the caliber of the panelists. We've had great panelists at every event for sure, but this one in particular seems to have the stars seem to have aligned in how we were able to get lucky enough to bring this group together. So I know that they'll introduce themselves, or Darren will introduce them here in a bit, but I'm just thrilled to see what comes out of this. So we're here today to talk about this great disconnect that I see and that I think many people see, but that seems to have an obvious solution. And I don't know why everybody doesn't seem to see it as obvious as I do, or as I have come to see it. And it gets talked about a lot in terms of some of these different buzzwords you get thrown around that often come in the form of excuses, the talent shortage, the skills gap, the pipeline problem. These are terms that employers often use to describe this disconnect between the job openings that they have and the presence of qualified candidates to fill them, let alone the ability of finding diverse qualified candidates to fill them. And this conversation is superimposed on all these big macro level forces that I described earlier. And so we have this, economic fallout from the pandemic where we have unemployment higher than it's been in many years. And the unemployment is disproportionately coming from underrepresented groups, particularly Black and Latino women. So, we have somewhere around 11 million people unemployed. There are 22 million people who are underemployed. And in December, there were somewhere around 6.5 million job openings in the United States. So you look at that, there's 33 million people who are either looking for their first opportunity or any opportunity, and those who are looking for a better opportunity. And there's only 6.5 million openings. So the math doesn't add up. Those slots should be filled, but it's not that simple. And employers continue to cry for help. They use those terms I mentioned earlier: talent shortage, skills gap, pipeline problem. But meanwhile, They maintain a narrow focus on technical skills. They have no real ability in their hiring processes to identify or assess soft skills or essential skills. They're relying on, previous related experience or, brand name degrees or a bachelor's degree when maybe they don't need one, right? So there are all of these reasons, these entrenched systemic reasons why what may appear on the surface to be a skills gap or a talent shortage is actually an opportunity gap that is being sustained by various types of implicit bias and ineffective hiring practices and outdated hiring norms. So, it's one of our contentions as a company that by, re-examining job qualifications, screening interview processes, there's 70 million of what Opportunity at Work, Byron Agusta's policy shop has described as stars, people who are skilled through alternative routes. And many millions of other, folks from other underrepresented backgrounds who are available. And over the past couple of months, as I personally have been talking to workforce developers, folks from different community colleges, business owners, even some government entities who are they really are trying to remake their hiring processes to be more inclusive. They're actually authentically responding to this moment that we're in. But at the same time, they're by and large possessed with a sort of either or thinking where they feel like addressing things from a diversity and equity and inclusion perspective somehow automatically corresponds to a reduction in a performance-based or hiring quality level, that there's a trade-off there. And at Whole Story, we believe and we know that this dichotomy is decidedly false. There's a ton of research that demonstrates the crucial relationship between what we call soft skills, but really boils down to people who are resilient, adaptable, emotionally intelligent, lifelong learners, which is what every employer needs right now, that folks from underrepresented groups are as likely or more likely to have these qualities than the folks that are being biased towards with their existing processes. And so we're working really hard as part of our outreach, our business development, our market education to bring that awareness to hiring managers, to employers, and to businesses. And so that's our little slice of the view that we get, and where a lot of our focus has been for the last few months. So I know that Darren has worked up some great questions to help guide this conversation, and I'm excited to hear what everybody has to share. But I know that I will have my ears open personally for your insights or observations on how we collectively, as a workforce development ecosystem, can get better at educating the market, educating the labor market about the truth of that relationship. So with that, I would like to turn it over to my partner, Darren, and the panelists to help enlighten us and solve all these problems.
Thank you so much, John. Good morning. My name is Darren Vernado, and I'll be your moderator for today. And I just want to say a special thanks to our panelists today. As John mentioned earlier, we're really excited about getting into this conversation with each and every one of you. So thanks for being here. To begin, why don't we start by having you guys introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your industry and the people you serve. And I was thinking that I would go clockwise, but quite frankly, I can't figure it out on my screen. So how about we start with you, Joyce? You can introduce yourself and we'll go to Molly from there, and I'll pipe in afterwards.
All right, well, thank you. I really appreciate being here today and being able to to contribute to this conversation. My name is Joyce Loveday, and I'm the president of Clover Park Technical College, which is located south of Seattle in the Tacoma area, just south of Tacoma, Lakewood, Washington. My college is a technical institution, and it's part of the state's public institutions, part of the community and technical college system, of which there are 34 colleges across Washington state. We offer programs that prepare people for the workforce, and that comes in the form of certificates, associate's degrees, and even some bachelor's degrees. We teach people in 44 different technical fields, ranging from things such as professional piloting, aviation maintenance, welding, automotive technician, HVAC, to things also such as nursing, surgical technology, medical histology, and then some more technology-oriented things such as mechatronics and advanced manufacturing and computer programming. Our bachelor's degrees that we are now offering are in cybersecurity, interior design, operations management, and mechatronics engineering, technology, and automation. So we serve Pierce County, and we have just under 7,000 students a year, and that equates to about 4,000 FTEs. 50% of our students are students of color. So we have more students of color than our county reflects, which we're very proud of and foster. Unfortunately, our demographics of our faculty and staff are not yet at that level, and we are working on that to increase it so that when students come through our doors, they see people they can relate to, that they know they're welcome, that there's an environment they're familiar with, and that they feel like they belong. Let's see. I would just want to note that students from the community and technical colleges, typically the CTCs are the first point of access to higher education for most historically underserved students of color. And also that when students do go on to their bachelor's degrees at our illustrious bachelor's institutions in the state of Washington, we know that 40% of the students who graduate from those institutions started at a Washington public community or technical college. So that's just a little bit about the community and technical college system and Clover Park. And I'm going to pass it on now to the next individual.
Thank you, Joyce. Molly?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for that, Joyce. It was really interesting to hear about your college.
Yeah.
I work for the Urban Institute. It's a nonpartisan, nonprofit research organization based in Washington, D.C. But what we do is we basically learn from lots of people like the ones who are on this panel today. So we work collaboratively with employers and community colleges and training providers and other folks to think a little bit about how we can improve signaling, which I'm sure is something that we're going to be talking a lot when we get to the first questions around like the skills gap, right? There are lots of things about the way we think about education that make it really hard to make those connections to opportunities. And there are lots of things about hiring and the conventions around doing that, and some of the things that have happened with hiring going to scale and going online that have made it also very difficult for employers to make those sort of connections. So some of the things I'll be sharing on the panel today are really like lessons that we have learned from practitioners like the folks here. So I'm really excited to join the panelists today.
Thank you, Molly. Frida, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Frida Caesar. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Chief Equity Officer at CCC, Central City Concern. I won't acronym you to death. And Central City Concern is a nonprofit organization that primarily focuses on supporting homeless individuals who are seeking housing, employment, health services. We have a number of federally qualified health centers. We provide supportive housing, recovery-based housing, family housing, individual single room occupancy as well. We also have an employment program that supports individuals who are previously homeless, maybe engaged in treatment services, and perhaps even returning home from being incarcerated to find employment. We have social enterprise businesses that really help support our clients and patients getting really meaningful employment experience to really help build their resumes. Our employment specialists who are helping support our patients and clients are working from a model called supported employment that really seeks to really try to understand what is a person's passion around where they want to work and what their career goals are, and really strive to do a lot of really motivational interviewing, as well as a lot of job development to help clients and patients get connected to employers who are ready for them. And so that's a little bit about my organization. I have worked for Central City Concern for about 16, 17 years now. I started there in the Employment Access Center department and worked there, eventually ran the entire program and was the director over there. And recently transferred over to our equity department. My passion for work that I did at the Employment Access Center and now in my current role is really primarily, it's based on my own lived experience being involved with the criminal justice system, as well as my passion for research. I was in my graduate program at Portland State University in the social work program. And in one of my last classes, I put together a project proposal for a program that is now at CCC that serves African Americans who are leaving incarceration. So that's where my love for equity work really developed and blossomed. And now I'm living the dream, doing this work in a way that really helps our organization from a strategic plan standpoint, and really doing everything that I can to advance equity for our clients and our employees. So I'm very happy to be here and honored to be sharing the panel stage with all of you, and hopefully providing some input and some learnings for folks to really take back and put to use in their organizations and businesses. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here, Frida. Kathy, would you like to introduce yourself? I'll just say, as a former veteran, I'm especially happy that you're
here. Thanks. I'm happy to be here. Thank you, John and Darren, for inviting me. And this is my passion for the past 6 years. I've been living to mitigate these types of gaps in employment. So I'm Kathy McClatt, and I'm the director of the Career Services Division of Vets to PM, which we are going to be renaming as a sister company, which is Vets to Civilian Professionals. And we help transitioning military and veterans achieve meaningful, lucrative post-service careers, because veterans are one of the key populations and underemployed in the underemployed sector. And my passion has been to help mitigate that. So I developed the Career Services Department. I'm a professional resume writer, and helped a veteran in need, helped him with a resume. It turned his professional life around, and he was one of the very first people who went through the Vets to PM training program. So we do certification training for transitioning military. Started out with the project management professional, the PMP certification, since so many veterans run projects and don't even know it's called that. And so we have several different certifications now. One of them that is solely meant to teach the language of the civilian workforce to veterans, because they speak a different language. When they go into the military, they're told, here's a handbook and this is what you need to know, and everything's called something different. So the certified manager certification helps them if they just buy the book and don't even take the course, it will help when you go to job interviews and be able to speak the civilian language, and that's gonna set you up better for success than if you didn't. So we have many different ways to do that. On the career services side, we do resumes, we do LinkedIn optimization, we do interview skills workshops, and then I work with employers, and I offer services, job posting and flat fee placement and subscription to our candidate database, which is just hitting 5,000 this week, 5,000 candidates who are soon to be or transitioned already veterans. And we also just were DoD SkillBridge approved. So now we're working with employers to bring interns in the last 6 months of their service to work at companies. So companies can see the benefit of hiring a veteran without having to pay for them for up to 6 months before they transition. And we are revolutionizing the SkillBridge program by including certification training. So somebody comes out of the service, if they're project management focused, they're going to get the PMP and the professional Scrum Master certification while they're in their internship. And if the host company doesn't hire them, they're going to have a great resume. They're going to have certifications that are geared toward their industry. They're going to have the on-the-job training from the internship, and they're going to get a job when they come out. So we have a lot of things going on. My history is I started out in human resources for about 4 years, helped a small government contractor double in size. Then I went into executive search and recruiting. So I've approached job hiring, job search, placement from the employer side, from the executive search, working with several different employers. And I can tell you, working with talent acquisition and hiring managers, there's a big gap right there that we can talk about. Because the talent acquisition people are on the front line, and oftentimes they don't even really understand what the hiring manager wants. And therefore, that can start a whole slippery slope of gaps along the way. So I'm excited to talk about this. I'm passionate about this subject. Thank you again for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kathy.
Mm-hmm.
And Michaela. Wonderful to see you again this morning.
Good to see you. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, Darren and John, for having me today. I'll start way back. Actually, I was very interested in social work and nonprofits in college. I went to school in New York City and had an opportunity to do some incredible internships, including working with tutoring teens through the Department for Juvenile Justice, and also tutoring offenders as part of an Alternatives to Incarceration program. So they had the option to get tutored through their GED as opposed to doing time. However, my parents are both employment lawyers on the plaintiff side. That means they're the people who sue companies when things go wrong. And I grew up at the dinner table hearing some pretty horrific and unbelievable conversations about the things that people say and do to each other in companies. And I can remember as young as 9 years old, just shaking my head and thinking there has got to be a better way. So I really, truly believe that that is what drew me into human resources. I studied and got my master's in HR, started out in recruiting, spent about 15 years in big companies doing HR for folks like Microsoft and Amazon. And then almost 6 years ago now, founded my firm, which is called Reverb. And our passion is really about helping companies create healthy, inclusive culture. We do that through helping them with human resources consulting, as well as management and leadership development and executive coaching. So even though we don't consider ourselves a diversity, equity, and inclusion firm, we try to encourage the founders and leaders and CEOs and vice presidents that we work with to look at every part of their people processes, their culture, and their talent through that lens of inclusion. I have a lot to say about recruiting. I will save most of it for the conversation, but I will say we're not a recruiter. And yet we have the benefit of doing matchmaking and introductions all the time, just because of the people that we know. And what's interesting is that the power of an introduction or the power of a referral can overcome some of those barriers of this person doesn't have the exact right resume or didn't go to what I think is the top school. It opens a door. And so I know what we're going to be talking about today is what are all the other many ways we can open the door to those candidates who may appear non-traditional or aren't the cookie cutter fit that hiring managers sometimes think that they need. I also had the pleasure last year of publishing a book, my first book, hopefully not my last. The book is called Female Firebrands, and as a basis for the book, I interviewed 13 amazing, professional, mission-driven women who are also great advocates to other women. They include founders and CEOs, as well as social impact and nonprofit leaders. And the book is for women, to let them know that they're not alone in the challenges and struggles that they may face in the workplace, and to give them some very practical tools and tips that they can use to take care of themselves. It is also a book for the male advocates and allies who we know want to be part of that conversation and need to be part of the conversation, but don't always know whether or how, or, how do I express that I'm an ally? So I tried very hard to share a lot of really positive stories about the men who have supported me throughout my own career, and actionable tips for those male allies as well. So just thrilled to be here, and I plan to learn a lot today. So thank you again.
Wonderful. Thank you all for being here. We're really excited to jump right into this conversation. I'll just say that what I'll do is I'll ask the question, or better put, I'll read the question, and I will kick it off with one person. I'll point to one person, and then I'll be less directive. I'll allow you guys to kind of jump in where you'd like. So I'll read the question and point to the first person, and then we'll do a jump ball from there. Okay. All right. The theme of this conversation is about the so-called talent or skills gap, or sometimes referred to as the opportunity gap. It seems there's a discrepancy between how various stakeholders speak to the disconnect between people and jobs. Can you share with us your understanding of this topic and how we ought to talk about it? And why don't we start with Molly?
I'll give it a shot here, get us started. So I think in a lot of ways, the whole conversation about a skills gap is sort of a misnomer, right? That people are not necessarily equipped to do the job. So I mean, there's an issue about sort of matching and signaling that's really challenging, right? One of the things that we've seen in the research that we've done that we don't talk about a whole lot is that we've actually been tremendously successful in expanding access to post-secondary education, right? So 60% of people have some sort of post-secondary education right now, 60%, right? And if you look at ONET data about, who does those jobs currently and the level of education needed to access those jobs, 60% of jobs actually don't require any. Let that sink in for a second, right? So we have a lot of people with a lot of education and a lot of skills. And if, we have a job market that looks like this, you have a lot of downward pressure, right? Not everybody can fit into the jobs that are requiring 4-year degrees or 2-year degrees. And so those people are doing jobs that maybe people in high school used to do. And those people get displaced, right? We have a lot of sort of like downward pressure in some ways on job access, right? And we know who loses whenever we set that up, right? And with the increasing cost of college, it's harder and harder to get an ROI on what you're putting into it, right? And then, in terms of sort of connecting with jobs, I mean, even people have 4-year degrees have difficulty communicating what they know how to do. If you have a history degree, right? How do you tell an employer what you know how to do because you have a history degree? Like, we're not used to thinking about education in that way or translating it into skills and competencies that fit into how employers think about things. And at the same time, employers have sort of like an interesting problem because now, it used to be pretty easy to filter out by degree, or that you could just, there's a smaller group of people
And then you could just, teach them to do whatever. It was sort of a proxy for just like, teachability. Well, it's not really that case anymore because some people have so much education. So there's like this incentive to have to keep on cutting higher and higher, right? To get a smaller pool that you can even look at to approach the problem. And simultaneously, Peter Capelli wrote this really great book called Why Good People Can't Get Jobs, that everybody should read because I think it was life-changing for me. That talks about, we took job search online, right? So it used to be you'd put a listing out, you get 20 applications, you look at them, you figure things out. It's more manageable. You could be more, reflective or personal in your approach to it. Now you put one out, you get 1,000, right? So you're trying to figure out how you make the process just, practical for you as an employer. How do you do that? And the easiest things to filter out on are degrees or experience or some of these really like, easy click a button sort of things that end up being very exclusionary, right? At the same time, we've downsized human resource capacity in most businesses, right? It's much smaller than it used to be. And we have AI, like people are trying to solve that problem with AI, but they're basing it on the characteristics of the workers they already have. So if you don't already have a diverse organization or inclusive organization, you're actually just reproducing inequality, right? So there are a lot of just sort of difficulties about, how do you improve that signaling or that matching so that people can find a good match, right? Employers are definitely dissatisfied with that in a lot of ways. And, you see even like the chamber leading a lot of efforts around, trying to figure out how to get those better matches and are more based on what people can do, right? And how they can insert to an organization and add value. And you see Western governors and a lot of competency-based education people trying to do the same sort of thing on the post-secondary side, right? But there are definitely challenges about how we move into, sort of a new mindset around both education and hiring that is more inclusionary and also again improves the ROI on education for folks. Because even the people who we think about as being most advantaged are having a really hard time inserting into the labor market if you're Gen Z or a millennial, right? Very different than older generation. So that's sort of like how I'm thinking about things when they talk about the skills gap.
Great. I saw a couple of you kind of in shaking your head, kind of in violent agreement with her. Joyce, you were one of them, and Frida, you were the other. Would either one of you like to chime in on this? You're on mute, Joyce.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. I do think the thought about the skills gap as being somewhat of a misnomer. I agree with that. I think that a lot of energy and effort and work goes into preparing people with the skills that they need for the upcoming markets that are out there. And sometimes it can be a bit of a point of frustration when you hear, hey, we can't find anybody, but yet that there are people with skills that could do those jobs that have been trained for similar jobs, but yet there are blocks because of things being, I think sometimes processes at institutions and in organizations. We may take the easy road. I think it's something that Molly said that stuck with me in terms of setting up the highest level of standards that we expect for a role because we think that we need just the very highest expectations for that role. But the reality is that the person who gets in there and the personality and the skill sets and their work ethic and their ability to get things done is what makes a good person in that role. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they graduated from a name brand institution or that they have gone through a traditional pathway of getting the skills that they need to succeed and really be an exceptional employee. And so I think I agree with the setting of a mindset and looking at things as more inclusionary, and for businesses to look at their role also in addressing the prosperity gap within our communities. It's not just I know we spend a lot of time in higher education looking at who we're serving. Are we providing are we having the same results across all elements of our student base? But I think we need to carry that into employers doing the same thing in terms of looking at what am I doing in my institution to grow employees, to strengthen employees, to give them the skills they need, because I know they're a great employee. So let's vision for them about where they can go and what they can do. And so I think some growth within institutions themselves, growing their employee base, but also looking at the standards that are set up there, and are those really necessary for a good person in that role or not?
Frida, would you like to weigh in on this as well, or I can move on to the next question?
Sure. I'll just say one quick thing, Molly, when you mentioned the artificial intelligence and just how that kind of reproduces the same kind of employee, and it made me think of affinity bias and how we believe that people who possess this one specific either state of being or personality or desire for doing their work. I think there's institutional bias that gets baked into the fabric of a business or organization, and I feel like artificial intelligence is just really promoting. So that gave me goosebumps when you said that. Yeah, so thanks.
And Michaela or Kathy, would you like to weigh in on this question, or I can move to the next?
I think everybody did an amazing job of answering that question and contributing thoughtful content. So I'm good on this one.
Excellent.
I had a quick comment. We work a lot with technology companies, and I think they're one of the biggest perpetrators of these issues. And there were a couple of things that I wanted to share. Google has actually done and published research that should be actually helping other tech companies solve for this. The 2 points that I recall, one was, so many tech companies are famous for these interview loops where you're interviewing with 8 or 12 or 15 people, right? So your chance of getting rejected goes way up. And Google did the research, and they actually found that after 4 interviewers, you're not really gaining any advantage. So their recommendation is to reduce the number of interviewers. They also researched pedigree, and they researched those, tier 1 high pedigree schools versus others. And what they found in their research, at least at Google, was that in the first year, there might be a little bit of a difference. You may see a slightly higher performance from people from, for instance, the Ivy Leagues, but after year 1, that really drops off and disappears. For whatever reason, I don't believe that the other major tech companies, big and small, have embraced that research, but it's out there, and it would just be huge if they would. The other thing that I've personally seen when I worked in tech companies was sometimes technical jobs, even entry-level jobs, are sitting open for 6 months, for 9 months. But it's been very hard to get tech companies to look at the cost of that vacancy and what they could be doing with that time. Could they be investing in people? Could they be offering up, internships and other opportunities where people could actually learn and train and build the skills to fill that role, probably both cheaper and faster than everything they're trying as they're out there recruiting. So I don't know. I mean, whoever's listening, though, I would say from big tech, I think these are things that they could definitely embrace as part of the solution.
And if I can add to that, Michaela, that's an excellent point. And we talk about that with veterans because there's a lot of statistics about veterans leaving their first job out of uniform. There's, within a year, a little bit over a year, a huge percentage, 40% or so, leave that first job. And the company saw something in them when they hired them. And we really do talk to them about, if you get in that position, you realize, okay, this isn't really what I thought it was. but I think I would be really great at the job that X, Y, or Z person is doing. To teach them to have the confidence to go to their leadership and say, I don't think this one is the right fit, this position that I'm in, but I really think I would be great in this position. And for a company to be open to that, because then you're going to get better performance out of that employee. You're going to have, better retention statistics. And, so the company has to be open to it, but the employee has to also be able to recognize that maybe they're not in the exact right role, and they're better suited for another role, and they would be able to contribute better in that role. So I think all of what we're talking about requires employers to be open to thinking outside the box and different ways of thinking about their workforce.
That's great, great information there. My second question, you guys have kind of answered largely. I was going to ask the question of the role that employers are playing in this. We hear things like degree inflation and things like that. But Michaela, I thought that you did a pretty good job of speaking to it just a little while ago. So I want to move on, if I can, to the next question. We've talked to plenty of employers who don't seem to be aware of how workforce developers may be able to help their businesses to address this problem. Can you share what you see the role of workforce development is in closing this gap for businesses? Sorry, I can't read my writing all of a sudden. And why don't we start with you, Frida?
Can you repeat that question again?
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, so we've been.
Oh, I see it in the chat. Sorry. Okay. Okay. I think that there are a couple of different ways that developers can help close the gap. I think one of them is how businesses evaluate their candidate pools. So I think there's opportunity for businesses to really get clear on what are the job competencies, what are the competencies of the role and the job, what are they looking for? And one approach is, how a business may consider their candidate pool. So our candidate pool may not necessarily possess the specific experience or education that a business may have historically seen in their candidate pools. But still, there's an opportunity to look a little bit deeper at transferable skills, which, focusing on the competencies such as decision-making, such as leadership, such as problem solving, managing diversity. These are a number of different competencies that can be really transferred into a number of different roles, even though a person may not necessarily have the exact technical experience or education. This can give employers, businesses opportunities to really, be open, as Kathy said, being open to different possibilities for their candidate pool that they want to actually bring in for an interview. So I think that's definitely an approach that businesses can take, working with a job developer or workforce developer to help them kind of understand how to do that work in their candidate pool. I think there's opportunity for developers to really help businesses and employers to think differently about how they organize their interview process. There's an opportunity for businesses to invest in training and develop strategies to reduce bias and implicit bias in their interview process. I think we talked a little bit about affinity bias already, but I suggest focusing on dismantling affinity bias, bias that really seeks to, there's really interesting things that people can be, take affinity to, whether you went to the same school, or you have the same hair color as me, or you like Beyonce, like how I like Beyonce, right? Like there's really odd ways in which we draw affinities in certain interview processes, and getting people to understand when that's happening and how to dismantle that. I think there's stereotype bias that we want interview folks that are interviewing to really understand, and that's assuming that a candidate will show up in your business and work for you a certain way based on how they look, maybe their gender. So for instance, a woman getting hired into a position may be perceived as compliant, or might serve as a subservient in a subservient role. So really trying to get people to kind of dismantle that, as well as confirmation bias. I think sometimes folks who are interviewing folks can be right away making an assumption that a person may not necessarily be a good fit. So in the interview process, instead of taking the time to really get to know them, they're constantly seeking for confirmation that this person is not going to work out. This person is not a good fit. So I think those are two ways that developers can really help businesses and employers to really, close the gap. And that's, how they look at their candidate pool and how they're organizing themselves around their interview process.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Frida. I'd like to go to Kathy, and then I'm coming to you, Joyce, okay?
So from the veteran perspective, I know that there are workforce development agencies that can help retrain people for what they're interested in. So from our training side of the house, we might have people come through who are getting funding for certification training because they're going through one of those programs. I think making the process less cumbersome for the person to get that funding and to get into programs. I think there's, we work with the VA a lot to get people through our program, and it takes a lot of staying power and a lot of time and effort for the veteran to get that funding and get that approval and go through every hoop that they have to go through to get it. So the program is amazing when you can get it, and we counsel the people, take your time, work through this to the end, because it will be worth it in the end. So I think maybe making those types of programs more accessible or easier for the person to navigate, so so they can get through that program and get retrained and get on the job. Maybe it's even more about awareness. For instance, we do a lot of work with a company that helps organizations take advantage of the work opportunity tax credit for the underrepresented populations, and he came to us because he focuses on the veteran side of it. So every veteran that goes through our program, we tell them about this, and they can go get themselves pre-qualified. But this gentleman's portal can help companies register for this portal, pay a very small annual fee, and they do all the work to take advantage of the work opportunity tax credit. And so many companies don't know about it. And I know that's not a little bit off track from the question, but my point is the programs can be very cumbersome. And if there was better awareness, better communication, I'm big on that, then perhaps people would be able to take advantage of those programs more, and the companies would be able to take advantage and hire more people that don't look like what they think they should look like, but are really qualified for these jobs.
Excellent points. Thanks, Kathy. Joyce?
Yeah, all right, thank you. I liked what Kathy said about making the services that we offer and access to individuals less cumbersome and convenient, and increasing that communication, I think, is really essential and key. From the perspective that I come from, which is I guess a training provider and an educator, it is really assuring that our programs are are matching the skills and knowledge that are current with industry right now, and making sure that we're in that communication with employers so that their input is integrated and implemented within those programs, so they know that what they need is that there is a source of that, those skills, and not only the technical skills, but the soft skills. I think engaging with our employers in a way also so that they feel comfortable utilizing some of the training that is there for them to upskill their own employees. And I have one example at our institution. We have a program called Mechatronics, which is kind of that confluence of electronics, robotics, information technology to be problem solvers and to make systems work. Well, we've got tremendous faculty that are very, have their ear to the industry in that program. And they use their advisory committee meetings not only to talk about the curriculum that they're offering, but to brainstorm and think with employers about what's happening next in your industry. Where do you need to go next? What do we need to be preparing our current students and your employees for, so that they'll be prepared to handle what's going to be happening within the industry? And then they've also set up some co-op certifications. So they're working with employers, just a few at this point, but to work where the employer will identify 1 to 3 or however many they would want to of their employees who they know are good employees, but would like them to have some additional skill sets to move to another level or another position. And then the employer pays the expense for that student to come to school 1 day or 2 evenings a week or whatever it might be for some specific skill sets in the mechatronics area and the advanced manufacturing area. And so I think partnerships like that are important, but that really does take making it convenient for them. It does take having communication, being in partnership together with industry, and not just preparing a product and expecting it to be selected. A product meaning our students being ready now to go out and be there. We have to help connect the employer with employees. And I think it sounds like all of our organizations are working to do that.
Wonderful, thank you. You know, Molly, I wonder from a research perspective, are you aware of any best practices, or can you point to any proof points for this particular situation?
You know, there's some really interesting experimentation happening at the state level around workforce, right? And there may be some really interesting roles to be played at that level in terms of sort of like improving the matching or reducing this sort of friction. So there's a state, for example, that's doing really interesting work with employers directly at scale, and trying to map out what the skills and competencies are for all these different occupations that are in demand at that level, but also, you know, specific enough to regions, right? Then they're communicating that to their whole community college system, right? And trying to map that to credentials. And then they're essentially grading or making transparent for those credentials, all the non-degree credentials in the state. You know, how in demand is this credential? How well does it align with skills and competencies that people are hiring on, right? So you have, and they're creating a platform that's going to help learners navigate where their opportunities are, but they're also going to have an employer side of it where they're helping them use those skills and competencies or these credentials that have been identified as high value or mapping to those skills and competencies in their job descriptions and the way they hire, right? So they're trying to play sort of like an at-scale brokering role that's really interesting.
And there are other states as well that are working on, different approaches to that. But it feels like, I know there are a lot of community colleges and very local efforts that are trying to and very effectively, building local sector collaborations, things like that. But there really is a role for, workforce development at a larger level, at a systems level, to support that, right? And take some of the burden off individual organizations who often just don't have staff or capacity to do that, on top of, all the other demands of running an educational institution. So, and same goes for employers, right? Make a lot of assumptions that employers, have all this capacity. No, they're working really hard just to run their everyday operations, right? And could really use some, systems level sort of assistance to help them identify talent in an effective way.
Wonderful. For the listening audience, could you share maybe the state or some of the names of the states if folks want to research it on their own?
Not sure that I should, but there are a number of states that have participated in Credential Engine that are really trying to lead the way. States like Indiana, Alabama, Colorado, others, and they're all doing sort of different things, but all trying to have more credential transparency about what learners are getting when they study, and how, what their odds are, again, of connecting with an opportunity.
Michaela, you mentioned that I believe you said you primarily, or a large portion of your customer base are tech companies. Do you get an opportunity to see this dynamic at work?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the other folks are definitely more experts on this than I am. What I thought when I saw the question, though, is, where do we hear the need? And as folks were just saying, employers are struggling too, right? While they may be creating some of their own barriers unintentionally, they do want good talent. They do want people to fill these roles. The times when we have opportunities, I think, to connect employers with workforce developers or let them know about these kind of options is when they get focused on a very specific problem. I think a classic example in Seattle is we want to hire more women engineers. And then you do hear all those common, I want to say excuses, that's not nice, but challenges about the pipeline, this and that. We post the job, we're not finding the best candidates. And there's a local group here, Ada Developers Academy, that is a coding school and program for women who don't come from CS backgrounds, who can get into engineering. And so we keep our ears open. I'm also, as I'm listening to this group, it is making me think of like, is there an article or a resource or a blog post, for instance, for our Seattle tech community that says, here are the 5 workforce developers you don't even know about that are going to help you solve your immediate hiring problem. I'm happy to spearhead putting something like that together if people can help me with content. So we hear it. I think even ourselves as Reverb, we're probably not knowledgeable enough or informed enough about all of these resources. Even when I heard Kathy, and I made a note to follow up, I heard Kathy talking about veterans, and I thought, oh my gosh, even for ourselves, when we're looking for consulting candidates, we're trying to find people from more and different backgrounds, and yet we ourselves haven't even tapped into anyone, for instance, who's specifically training veterans or providing resources for veterans. So I think part of it is people are busy, they're overwhelmed, and we have to create that path of least resistance. Like, look how easy we can make it for you to build these relationships and to take advantage of this available talent.
That's fantastic. And I think you're probably going to have some takers on that.
Yeah, please. I'm gonna throw my email in the chat right now, and please take me up on it.
Fantastic, fantastic. I'll go to the next question here.
Can I add one more thing?
Oh, please.
Okay.
Please, absolutely.
So we typically we started as project management certifications, but we're adding more, and so because a lot of our population, as far as client, hiring companies, are government contractors. So we're trying to get people under the DoD 8570, 8140, IT, Security Plus certifications and things like that. And so we partner with some companies that do IT certifications that we don't at this point. And we came across this organization out of California that was trying to reverse the cyber and IT hiring practices, because companies want, computer science background, or, some type of engineering degree, computer science degree. And they're trying to reverse it, where they're taking people and putting them on IT cyber internships, getting them on the job training, using these technologies and these systems, and reversing it so they can say, look, I've got experience doing this. While I don't have a computer science degree, I'm a great candidate. And so they're interning them with their customers, and then these people are then getting jobs. So they're out there. All these programs are out there. And I know it's hard to just find them. We just happen to find them through a connection, just like how I met Darren. So there are people trying to reverse this and kind of bridge those gaps. And it's finding the right ones at the right time.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm going to, looking at time here, I'm going to try and, we have 3 more questions, and I'm going to try and get to them very quickly here. Our CEO, John, recently published an article in a Tri-Cities newspaper arguing that underrepresented people were best equipped to rebuild our economy due to the strong likelihood that they possess key soft skills needed in times like these. Who do you see as the most undervalued or overlooked populations that can fill this gap, and why? And why don't we start with you, Frida?
Thanks. So I think for me, there is an opportunity for engaging more with our millennial workers. I do feel like they are a group that are really tenacious and really wanting to immerse themselves in the workforce, but may also have a different sort of approach and way of either communicating or kind of observing or communicating their desires and their career goals, as well as just in the workplace. I think I work with a couple of millennials. They can be misunderstood a lot. They ask a lot of questions, and that, for me, I'm still a little bit old school. I may look a little young, but I'm old school. I come from an era where, your boss told you to do something and you did it, right? So I think those personality traits can be a little challenging for some of us old schoolers. I think giving those folks more opportunity to get more education and really try to tackle new projects in a way where you're providing, a lot or a considerable amount, a decent amount of overseeing and shadowing of them. But I think they have the ability to really stand up to a challenge. I think the other piece of what I'm seeing with millennials, they just have a different way of observing problems, issues, processes, in a way that I feel like can really benefit a business in tackling a problem. Maybe there's, production issues or ways in which you're trying to get a body of work done, but their thinking is just really different. And I think it's really critical to embrace them as well, because they're our future. They're going to be taking care of us. They're going to be doing the hiring and the firing soon. So I think they're a critical part of this, of building our economy and closing the gaps. I also feel that our, again, my passion for folks who are leaving incarceration, because of my own lived experience, really impacts my thinking around this. But I do feel like folks who are leaving, prison and incarceration are a very underutilized group. There's a lot of institutional policies and practices and processes that are in place that really prevent folks who have a criminal background obtaining certain jobs. And pieces of that is, there's criminal background checks that require, you a person not having a criminal background within the last 7 years. But if you did 5 years in prison, then you have 2 more years to go, right? So you may want to put your life back together. You may want to do all of these things, but there's barriers there. So I think that is a group that is underutilized. In prisons, they have a lot of different programming, a lot of different jobs that people are able to do, DMV, cleaning, exercise, teacher, exercise instructor, tutor. There's a number of different skills that a person does receive while being incarcerated. And those folks, I believe, are really wanting opportunity, are just, they're so motivated. But I think that there's policies and practices that are in place that really prevent them. So I think our millennials are a group, and that's not to say that there aren't other groups, but I think for me, in my experience, millennials and folks who are exiting incarceration are a group that are a little overlooked. So thank you.
That's wonderful. Knowing you just in a little bit that I know you, Frida, I can tell that you are a very good advocate for both of those groups. So thank you for sharing. I feel like you all have a lens on this. So I'd really like to, maybe Michaela, if you could go next, and then we'll go to Kathy.
Sure, thank you. I learned this word from my colleagues in the last year, really, which was replacing underrepresented with underestimated. And I think the moment I do that, and then I'm like, there's your answer. If you're not in the majority, basically, you're most likely underestimated. And I think there are so many populations out there that are so deserving of opportunities. I'll call out one that is less often talked about. I happen to be on the board of a nonprofit called BEST, that is Businesses Ending Slavery and Trafficking. And trafficking survivors, like many of the other groups we're talking about, they need a fresh start. They need that job opportunity. And it has to be the right environment. There has to be a certain amount of safety and training of supervisors to understand what is triggering, or what do I do if an individual is triggered. And BEST, in collaboration with some other organizations, has been working on a Safe Jobs Coalition, where employers can volunteer to be part of that process. They can receive the training that they need, and then they can receive a pool of candidates, and they don't always know, or ideally they don't know, which candidate maybe is a survivor and which is not, with the goal that they are treating everybody equitably. But especially with the impacts of COVID, like many populations, I know that survivors have struggled. A lot of the type of jobs that they might take, which could be, frontline or hospitality, are job opportunities that have decreased in the past year. So I would just kind of give a call out that if people are open, try looking for that Safe Jobs collaboration.
Fantastic. I have never thought of that population, but as soon as you said it, it makes lots of sense. Yeah. I would imagine that, well, I'll leave it there. Thank you. Kathy?
So from the veteran perspective, I know that we all hear a lot on TV and every ad and commercials and whatever, you hear about veterans. And many companies say they're veteran friendly and they mean it, but that's about as far as it actually goes. Everybody knows that, a veteran is, they're going to show up to work every day, and that's, that's how they think of them, but they don't really go deeper than that. They know they're good leaders, but what's leadership? Leadership is a part of management. It's just one facet of management. And it's education on both sides. Veterans, they don't have to apply for jobs. They don't have to interview for jobs. There's kind of a set, progress that they'll take. And if they meet certain requirements, they'll go to the next step. And then they have a transition class for a week or 2 weeks that shows them how to put together a resume that looks good, but all it talks about is their past. And it doesn't make any connection to what they want to do in the future, which is what I preach constantly, because if the person who's evaluating you for a job doesn't see what you can offer them, how you can reduce their pain, then they're going to overlook you. So, like I tell them, don't start your summary with, an Air Force veteran with 23 years, in the military, because that's not what people are looking for. They're looking for those other skills you have. So they're not necessarily underrepresented in the same way, Frida, that the people who are incarcerated, but they're underrepresented in a way that they're not taken seriously when they send their resume in, that kind of thing. So we work hard to try to mitigate that and to educate the veteran on how to best present themselves. And then Molly, you talked about skills, kind of transferring skills from one to another. There are a lot of applications and websites and things like that out there that will take a veteran's MOS, which is their job that they had, and map it to what they can do in the civilian workforce. But for instance, with project management, there's not a project management MOS, right? These people have been doing project management and they want to be project managers, but they might have been an aviation maintenance superintendent. They don't want to go and maintain aircraft or engines, when they transition. They want to run projects, and that's a function, not really a vertical. So there's just so many facets to it, which is why I'm so passionate about it. But I think a series like this, where people can tune in and hear these conversations, can open a lot of awareness to a lot of these issues. So thanks. Darren, you're muted.
I was just saying, as a Navy veteran, I really appreciate your advocacy, Kathy.
Thanks.
Joyce, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, certainly. As I thought about this, I was kind of in Michaela's court in terms of underrepresented. Nobody really stood out in my mind as the most. We have a lot of underrepresented people within industry, and I really love what was stated in that article by John, where it emphasized that members of underrepresented populations, such as Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQ people, veterans, disabled people, and others, that they frequently share a common denominator of adaptation and growth through struggle. And that stuck with me. I totally agree with that. I think as we're looking for being a resilient organization, that we need resilient employees. And I think that is a good argument for moving and expanding our view and making a point to hire underrepresented people at our institutions.
Excellent. Thank you. Molly, what does research say about this?
I don't know what research says. I'm going to make one very short, but I would say women, and particularly women of color, parents, right? Like mothers. Oh my gosh, if you talk about, what's needed in this particular moment with all of the challenges we have, we need people who can make miracles with very little and find innovative ways of solving problems. And we know that, women and low-income women do that all the time, just to, stretch a dollar, manage things, manage impossible schedules, deal with everybody's feelings about everything, right? And, there's a lot of value and skills that come from that experience that are absolutely translatable to, sort of the business challenges that a lot of folks are dealing with right now.
I love that. I always thought my mom would make an outstanding project manager. Talk about transferable skills. Okay, on to the next question. Top global management consulting firm McKinsey just released a series of recommendations for employers trying to address the growing need for soft skills, saying companies should seek to incorporate life experience into their interviews in a structured way. How do you think that identifying soft skills in this way might help address the problem of the soft skills, of the skills gap? And I am going to take that to Michaela.
You could see that I was like trying to hold my hand down. So many ways, I think employers still are prone to overlooking soft skills. They have that kind of over-indexing on the technical and functional skills. And when I worked in some of these large technology organizations, it was interesting because, of course, the technical and functional skills were really table stakes for people to get in the door. But when you saw people derailing or not succeeding, it was often because of a lack of soft skills. They couldn't problem solve. They couldn't have hard or conflict conversations. They couldn't receive feedback well. And so I think really soft skills are invaluable in terms of helping people be successful. And actually, this ties back to the first question you asked too about, or the first comments about sort of arbitrarily raising the bar on certain things just as a way to filter because of the volume of candidates we're seeing. I was talking to a founder just the other day, and he was sourcing, it was interesting, he was sourcing offshore engineers, and he was getting too many candidates, and he was using a coding skills test. And he said, well, gosh, what if I just made it harder to pass the coding skills test, but really meaning harder than it needs to be. And he wasn't trying to do anything wrong. He was trying to create a filter. And so then we brainstormed and said, well, why don't you leave that where it is, because that's actually what you need for the job, but let's maybe add some soft skills or something that's going to help you see if these individuals are aligned to your culture and to your values. And so he's going to experiment with that instead. And so sometimes I think employers need to slow down. There's a diversity expert on the East Coast named Jennifer Brown, and she said it better, I won't remember, but basically speed, moving too fast is one of the things that really prevents us from hiring diverse people into our organizations. And so I think we just need to help these employers slow down and be thoughtful, and understanding people's life experiences and how that informs their approach is just really a big part of that.
And if I could add a little bit, in the hiring process with companies, I think it's really critical that the talent acquisition person who's going to be working on filling that, being the first line of the resumes that make it through the applicant tracking system, really need to have time with the hiring manager to fully understand what it is they really need, more than having the hiring manager just create a job description or put what the requirements are going to go into the applicant tracking system. As when I worked in executive search, we refused to do a search with a company if they wouldn't let us have time with the hiring manager and actually discuss the candidates with the hiring manager, because you're just destined for failure if you don't. Super quick story. There was a company we worked for that was working in satellite technology that was merging with cellular service. And the hiring manager said, look, we're a satellite company. We can teach them that if they have these skills in cellular technology. They were unsuccessful. That's why they came to us. They had talked to 80 people. The first candidate I found that was good was on that 80-person list that they had rejected. And so when I inquired, it was because the applicant tracking system said they had to have satellite and they had to have cellular. And my candidate only had cellular, but fit this job perfectly, but never made it through to the talent acquisition person to even look at. So I think that plays a big factor as well.
Excellent. Joyce, would you like to weigh in on this question as well?
Sure, I love what has been said so far. You know, I do think that looking at the soft skills is and figuring out how to record that in terms of how to list that and test for that, or in order to select, is a challenging thing in an organization. So I'm so thankful that for the organizations out there helping employers figure out how to do that. I do think that it is really looking at how we employ and how we structure what is expected for our employees in a different way. And in that different way, I mean, instead of thinking about how somebody acquired skills, and looking at what those skills are. And so how do you change your whole practice? And I think that it's not an easy thing to do, but I think that it's necessary in order to get what we need and to have the results that companies want with quality employees with the soft skills that they need and are looking for, as well as some of the technical skills or the ability to learn the technical piece of that industry.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Full disclosure, CCC, Central City Concern, is a highly valued customer of ours. We just love working with them. And Frida, I know you have something to say about this particular question, and I'd love to hear your lens on it.
Well, I appreciate you putting me on the spot there. I'm still trying to track too. Like so we're on the soft skills question, right? Is that right?
Basically, life experience, incorporating life experience into the interview.
Okay. Yeah, I do have a lot to say about this. I think, you know, life experience is definitely key. I think for specifically for our organization, being in the line of business that we are in, serving folks who are, you know, looking to put their life back together. You know, there's a lot of research out there that has really helped us understand that people coming to us seeking services and getting services from a person who has lived experience, specifically, you know, folks who are looking to, you know, get off of drugs or, you know, come back home out of incarceration and put their life back together again. You know, the roles that we're filling, more often than not, when they're filled with a person who looks like the same person that they're serving and have the same experiences, I do feel like it really does go a long way in ensuring that that person gets the services that they need by a professional who's credentialed. You know, we do make sure that folks have, you know, their mental health license, you know, and their ability to practice, but that life experience, I think, is a huge thing. Along with that, I think the way in which we ask questions that really draw on life experience, whether it's, you know, about serving a specific population who's wanting to, you know, recover from substance abuse or alcoholism. I think life experiences, as Darren mentioned, you know, his mom being the perfect candidate for project management, right? But like, there's a number of different experiences where people can really tell you a lot about, and as Michaela put it so eloquently, I'm so stealing that. It's not about what people have done, but what they can do based off of those life experiences that really can tell us a lot, and really open our minds. Again, as Kathy put it very well, you know, as employers, as businesses, we need to really be open to new ways of thinking about who we're going to bring on to work for us. So, yeah.
And Frida, if I can comment on that, you know, the people that you're serving have had to overcome insurmountable obstacles. It's the same with, you know, you look at another underserved population, which are military spouses. It's hard for them to hold down a job because they're moving all the time, that kind of thing. You know, and they're also good project managers, Darren, right? You know how many times they've, you know, moved their whole household goods and had to, you know, take care of so many things that the spouse can't. So military spouses, you know, those experiences are key. I mean, they really tell you a lot about what a person is made of. Our CEO said to me once, the way he described leadership, he said, you know, in the military, oftentimes as the leader, you have to get people to do something that's against, you know, their own survival instincts, and they're going to do it because they trust you. So those qualities are something. But if the interviewer doesn't know how to ask those questions, and then evaluate those responses in relation to the position that they're trying to interview, then so I'm also an advocate of organizations either having an HR person or a talent acquisition person in interviews, which isn't possible in most companies, but have training for the hiring managers who are going to be managing those interviews, so they know. I mean, from the veteran perspective, the stories I hear of questions that they're asked are just unbelievable. You know, questions that are illegal to ask constantly are just rolling off people's tongues left and right. So there's got to be education for whoever is doing the interviews to learn how to extract that information from these people.
Excellent. Before I go to the last question, I will, Molly, would you like to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, actually, I really would.
Please.
Just want to emphasize, you know, how cool it is, the approach, the asset-based approach, that whole story is taking in terms of soft skills, because historically soft skills have been very coded to mean, you know, soft skills so white, right? Like with, you know, welfare reform and other things, they basically took funding away from any actual technical training, and we're like, you just need some soft skills, which was, you know, not a very subtle signal, right? And not recognizing, you know, the soft skills of great value and the assets that people have from their life experience, right? And so this is just a really important and pivotal way of thinking about it that sort of rebrands that and changes sort of the lens to really focus on what people have to offer from the lives that they've had.
So glad that you shared that, Molly. Thank you. Just to check in real quick, we have 4 minutes. I'd like to ask panelists, can you give us an additional 5 minutes for this last question? Excellent. Okay, here we go. How can employers overcome previous resistance they might have felt around inclusive diversity hiring practices and take advantage of workforce development partnerships to close the opportunity gap? I'll start with you, Michaela. And again, I would love for all of you to weigh in on this one.
You have such a good sense for where my brain gravitates. I would say there are two things. First, and a lot of people have mentioned this, but I think we need, I don't want to say just unconscious bias training, but we need to learn to proactively root out bias at every stage of the interview and hiring process, from the way those job descriptions are written to training recruiters, HR and hiring managers that are on the front line of interviews, and people who are leading the hiring debrief. So we need to have, you know, work toward eradicating bias from each of those steps. I think that is one way to retrain people. The other, and I hate to say it because the business case has been made again and again and again, but within certain organization, it is dollars and facts and productivity and efficiency that will convince them. And because we know more diverse teams and people with more diverse backgrounds are more creative, generate more revenue, more profit, more innovation, right? That list goes on and on. We have to still remember that some people still need to see the business case in order to embrace diverse populations. Sad but true. Sad but
Thanks
true.
for that reality.
One day that will no longer be the case, but today we're still there with some.
Excellent, excellent. Frida, would you like to go next?
Sure. I think, Michaela, the points you hit on around like that institutional perspective, that systems perspective, rooting out that bias in all areas of the hiring process, I think is really awesome. Let's see. I think another part of me just really wants to get folks to really think about how this impacts them intrinsically, and kind of to your point, you know, Michaela, like there is definitely folks who really need to like really understand that business line piece, and like it makes sense because it makes dollars, right? If it don't make dollars, it don't make sense, they say. But how can we also start to get folks to really tap into it intrinsically? Because I'm a touchy-feely person, like by nature, and I do feel like we need to have the bottom line conversation, but engaging businesses and employers to really start to do the internal work that they need individually to really embody this, right? Like to your point, like that future state, I want to get there so fast, but like how do we get people to really start to take their own internal inventory and you know, start to deconstruct their own bias, start to deconstruct their own placement in white supremacy culture, and you know how we got here, the historical context of why these barriers are here, you know, for all, you know, underrepresented groups, right? So I think for me, I mean, I think Michaela, you put it very well, and it's really hard at this point to really add on to that, but I think there's a big need for employers to really start to embrace the personalized piece and intrinsically how do you start to really embody that, and not just with the leaders, but create the culture for that to be the norm, right? For people to say, hey, we don't have any Black folks or any BIPOC folks or any underrepresented people on an interview panel. Like, how do we have a discussion about that? Or, hey, like there's something happening in our interviewing process. You know, I see bias, or I feel it. You know, how do we normalize, you know, those things? I think that will get us even further. So those are my only comments.
Outstanding, thank you. Joyce,
Can I
would you
add?
like?
Oh, go ahead, Joyce.
Okay, I'll go ahead.
Next, Kathy.
All right. I loved what Frida said about that we need to be doing the work and internalizing this as institutions. I think the time is right for that. I think that I'm very thankful at my organization that there is a groundswell, you know, of a feeling among individuals. You know, it's been important to us for a long time, but we've not changed very much. And now trying to figure out what we do to change and what we need to do to be different and have different results in the work that we do. A couple of thoughts that I have is, first, I do think that it comes from the leadership. And I mean, that groundswell is important, but if the leader isn't on board and saying, this is what we're doing and this is why, and kind of being a central person, doesn't have to be the only person, you know, in leading that work at the institution, but a central voice supporting it, making it clear of the importance within our organization to expand our diversity and showing that and leading by example. Additional things I think that could happen there is in the hiring processes, examining how we word things and making adjustments to our requirements, removing the preferred qualifications, because oftentimes they are just that add-on of things that aren't necessarily needed, but it keeps some people out. I think that in the organization, you can require a diverse pool to come forward. And that means taking our time, as someone had indicated, and doing what's necessary to get the announcement out and to get the word out and to recruit and look at why, if we're not getting a diverse pool, why not? And are there things that we can be adjusting? Sometimes it's our own looking at ourselves to see maybe people aren't wanting to come here for some reason. And let's look at those things as well. And not only requiring a diverse pool for that first, get their foot in, get their application reviewed, but requiring a diverse pool for those going to that next step of hiring, so that the hiring manager can look and have a good choice there. And I think that a lot of times this takes persistence and doing things differently. And I know it takes time, but that's an important and essential thing in our organizations, and to make an impact on who we are and the people that work at our institution. If there is hesitancy, as the question said, about moving this direction, consider a pilot project that is out there in terms of how we might expand diversity in an area, or change our expectations and focus on our soft skills instead of our technical skills, and then do some assessment around that. So I think that now is a good time around this, but I think it takes a lot of work, and I think I'm excited to see what happens at my institution as well as other institutions as we really make this a priority.
Very well said. Thank you. Okay, so with the remaining couple of minutes that we have, I'd love to get Kathy in, and also Molly.
So what we're talking about here is to change, to end resistance and pushback is really organizational change. And we've done a keynote on that, and we gave a lot of thought to this. And oftentimes that bias comes from the top-down approach, although Joyce, I do agree you have to have top buy-in to any kind of change. But oftentimes, it's just top down, this is what we're going to do. So we actually look at it as a bottom up. So if you want to enact organizational change, you have to involve the people across all divisions and at every level, starting at the lowest levels of the organization. They have to be involved in the change for that change to be successful. So we feel that, if you involve them, ask them, get brown bag lunches, make sure there's somebody from every level and every division in the company at these brown bag lunches, whether they're virtual or in person. Get committees together to try to solve these problems and make sure, that people from all these different divisions and all different levels are there. And I think internally, because we think of diversity as, hiring new people, into the organization, but you probably have a more, especially experientially diverse population or workforce than you really realize. So if you include those people, people across divisions are going to get to know each other and what each other does, and it's going to just build from there. And some people might end up moving positions, whatever, to diversify divisions, but it will be the groundswell that the organization needs to make those changes.
Outstanding. Thank you. Molly, would you like
I
to
love
close us out?
what both Kathy and Joyce said about advancement. I think that's really important. In most organizations, lower levels are very diverse, and then mid and higher, and right. And folks are hiring in middle level saying, we can't find anybody. I'm like, have you seen all the people who work for you who might be a great talent source for you that we don't notice, right? And really high functioning organizations are thinking about how the skills and competencies here map to these ones, map to those for their own organization. In terms of the culture business case thing, it's really interesting, right? Because a lot of high road organizations, they're making the decisions on culture. And because they make the decisions on culture, they don't have any metrics, right? But then when the economy goes to crap or there's some other problems, they end up, giving away those practices because they can't make the business case, right? So I think, one of the recommendations I have is, if you're doing these collaborations with employers,
track it, even if it's anecdote, but if you ideally data, and also be, work with employer to be willing to share that, right? Because we have a lot of issues with proprietary information, right? So that there really isn't a free flow of information about the business case, right? And so, there are going to be businesses that are, going to be making those decisions on culture and totally easily your allies, but there are going to be people who are going to be on the fence, right? And if you can show them data from like a similar organization that made changes that it had an impact, that could be really powerful. In general, we need more of that information in the public domain to be able to share how high road practices can be profitable for employers and good for people.
Very well said. Thank you so much. Thank you, panelists. It's been a wonderful morning, or a wonderful time with you. I know, Molly, you're on the East Coast. Wonderful time with you today. And I am going to turn it over to our CEO, John, to close us out. And everyone have a good day and a happy new year.
Thanks,
Thank
Darren.
you.
A 10
Nice to meet
minutes
you all.
plan, but I'm going to cut it short to 15 seconds because you've graced us with an extra 10 minutes of your time. But I just wanted to once again say how much we appreciate you being here. I know I personally got so much out of what each of you said, that it was such a fantastic diversity of perspectives. And that's what we try to do with these panels, is to bring people from different backgrounds and areas of expertise. And it hasn't always worked as well as this one did. It was so cool to hear you guys each coming at these questions from your own point of view and really adding to the conversation. So we're really grateful. And, this video of the whole event will be available pretty soon, today or tomorrow. We'll share it with you so that you can share it with your people. And then, we also like to take and create some clips of different kind of standout milestone moments that takes a little longer. Because those need to be edited and cut down. But when we have those, we'll share those with you as well. And thank you so much for being here, and we'll be in touch.